Kadam sir, Secretary, Pune District Education Association, Pune, honored us by chairing the session. You exactly pinpointed the post-COVID challenges of higher education. Thank you for accepting our invitation and gracing the occasion. I must thank the invitee principals. First of all, Dr. Balkrishna Zavre, Mama Saheb Mohor College, Kothurud, Pune. Principal Dr. Sharmila Chaudhary, Anantrao Pawar College, Pirangut. And Principal Dr. Vinita Basantani from MU College, Pimpri, who are our cluster partner colleges. Thank you very much. It is our collective efforts, vision, and initiative that made this event possible. I should not forget the convener of this web conference and our principal, Dr. Nitin Ghorpade, without which this idea of formation of cluster would not have been generated. He is the man behind the curtains whose constant, careful planning and execution always made all events a great success. Thank you, sir, for always being there with us. Let me thank all the HODs and the principals of our cluster partner colleges for working hard day and night. All the resource persons, session chairs, and the panelists who will share their ideas throughout the day. It is my duty to acknowledge them all. I welcome them all and wish them best luck. I have to mention our friends who shouldered the responsibility of technical support of this web conference. Mrs. Manjusha Patil and Dr. Prashant Mote successfully handled all technicalities of the conference. I must congratulate all the paper contributors who submitted their papers for publication. The number of participants and paper contributors is unbelievable. More than 250 have registered and more than 100 papers have been submitted for publication. I thank you all for showing faith in us. Let me conclude the inaugural session by wishing you all safe and happy life. Stay safe, stay home. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Sangeeta Ghorke, madam.
Thank you.
And now I'm handing over handing over to Dr. K.D. Sonane, sir, for the next session. Dr. K.D. Sonane, sir.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, sir. We can.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mainkar, madam. And good morning, everyone. On the behalf of PDE's Baburauji Golab College, Sangvi, Pune, and Cluster of English Language and Literature, I would like to welcome all of you in this international webinar on post-pandemic rejuvenation of higher education, a global perspective. Now let us turn toward the first session of this webinar. Friends,
sir,
gives me...
Sir, 2 minutes. Sir, 2 minutes.
Yes, sir.
Hello.
Yes, sir.
व्हिडिओ एन्व्हायरमेंट डेचा एक व्हिडिओ दाखवतो. पहिला दाखवायचा होता आणि सुरू करू. 1 मिनिटाचा आहे.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, can I start?
थँक्यू. आणि
Can I
चौधरी मॅडमचा वाढदिवस आहे, त्यांना हॅपी बर्थडे सेमिनारच्या वतीने. थँक्यू. फर्स्ट सेशन स्टार्ट.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Now let us turn towards the first session of this webinar. Friends, it gives me immense pleasure to introduce the resource person of this first session. In fact, we are very fortunate that today we are going to have the guidance of an eminent academician, Professor Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am. Since 1999, Professor Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am is working as Distinguished Professor of English, Coordinator of Peace and Social Justice Studies, Coordinator of Literature at Department of English, Octon Community College in USA. Right from the BA course up to PhD, she has obtained distinction, and most importantly, Professor Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am has obtained all these degrees through one of the prestigious universities, that is Loyola University of Chicago, USA. Her area of interest and specializations are 19th and early 20th century American literature, post-colonialism and critical theory. Professor Deshmukh ma'am has also received fellowships and grants for various projects from reputed institutions in USA. She has also given major contributions in the area of research by publishing and presenting various papers, book reviews in various conferences and journals. So friends, Professor Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am is present over here as a resource person to enlighten us by sharing her ideas and views on the topic Teaching Poetry in Pandemic Times, Eco-Poetic and the Future of Earth. On the behalf of organizing committee and all the participants of this one-day international webinar, I would like to extend a warm and heartiest welcome to our resource person, Honorable Professor Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am. I request all the participants during the lecture, if you have any doubt or query or question, you can raise it in question answer box. Friends,
Thank you. Hello.
I would like also to welcome our chairperson of this session, Dr. Vaishali Naik madam. It gives me an immense pleasure to welcome Dr. Vaishali Naik madam as the chairperson of this session. Friends, Dr. Naik madam is the guest of honor for today, but she has remained a very important part of our society and particularly of Baburauji Gholab College, Sangvi, Pune, as she has worked as vice principal and head Department of English in Baburauji Gholab College, Sangvi, before joining her present position. Presently, she is working as an associate professor at Liberal Arts, IDSS, that is Interdisciplinary School of Science in SPPU, Pune. Dr. Naik ma'am has also worked as a visiting faculty for various faculty development programs. She has also worked as a resource person for UPSC and MPSC classes. She is very much interested in translation and counseling. On the behalf of organizing committee and all the participants of this international webinar, I once again welcome chairperson of this first session, Dr. Vaishali Naik madam, and without wasting much time, now I would like to request resource person of this first session, Honorable Dr. Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am, to begin her presentation.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Good morning to you. It's nighttime here in the US. It's 1:30 in the morning. So excuse me if I'm a little bit tired, but what I will be doing is I have a PowerPoint presentation. So I don't know, everybody is seeing in these small boxes. It's fine, I guess. Or you can switch it. You can switch the view if you want to see the bigger screen when I show it. But mostly I'll be talking anyway, so it's fine either way. So first, let me thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. Especially, I want to thank Dr. Sangeeta. And I think it's appropriate that it's World Environment Day, considering the topic of my talk, and I believe also Sushamna's talks is also on nature and literature. So, which we didn't know we were both going to be speaking about this. I'm going to be speaking mostly on American and British literature, and she's speaking more on Indian literature. So it works out well, I think, that we have a common theme. So let me start the, let's see if how I do this. I start the PowerPoint.
Madhuri, you can share your slide.
Share screen.
Share screen.
I share, yeah, okay. Do you see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
Just you can start through slide show.
Okay. So I want to start first by saying that we're living in a time when the future of the earth and of humanity seems quite uncertain. Thus, many people today are reaching for literature about pandemics. Literature is one secular means by which people can gain perspective and meaning in the world. But does literature always meet the crisis of the times? Amitav Ghosh, in his book, The Great Derangement, Climate Change and the Unthinkable, wrote, the climate crisis is also a crisis of culture and thus of imagination. In a similar and related vein, I think we can safely say that the COVID crisis too has become a crisis of culture as much as it is a crisis of health and economy, and as the previous speakers in the previous session spoke of technology. And it is thus also a crisis of the imagination. There are a dozen or so literary works that have come to the fore in recent times. Many of you may have reached out to these works yourself. Maybe, I know there's been lots of discussion about them. These are sort of the classics of literature about pandemics and about epidemics that people are reading these days. But as you see, and this is just maybe about half the list of the works that I came upon. But overall, there are really not that many. There's maybe a dozen or maybe 15, 20 works at the most out of all the works of the Western literary tradition that really explicitly focus on the pandemic. So there are not a large number of such works, especially considering how impactful and formative epidemics and pandemics have been in human history. Indeed, the most recent pandemic in history, surpassing the scale of COVID, was the flu pandemic of 1918, during which it said that 15 million people perished around the world. And yet there are so few literary works directly about this pandemic. And if you remember, there's actually much work of that period, but it focuses more on World War I than on the pandemic. So I think Ghosh's insight into the failure of literary imagination when it comes to climate change is also applicable to the eras of pandemics. Both climate change and pandemics seem to have found articulation better in science fiction, speculative literature, and also one thing that Ghosh, when he sweeps through the literature of the decade since the 1960s, when the climate crisis escalated, and found that, quote, the archaic voice whose rumblings once familiar had now become inaudible to humanity, that of the earth and its atmosphere. He was not really talking about poetry. He mentions poetry maybe about in a paragraph or two in the whole book. He was looking at the novel. And what he was saying is that the novel is constrained by its origins in realism. And that because of that, it has a hard time dealing with climate change, because this is such an improbable, all the things that are happening are so improbable. I mean, and a similar thing, I think, with the pandemic, it's hard to put your mind around everything that is happening with the pandemic. So poetry has been attuned to that archaic rumbling of the earth, however. There has been numerous poets over the decades since the 1950s, 60s, when climate change really started to escalate in the world. When it got worse and worse, it was the poets who were really listening to what the earth was saying about the changes of modernity and the crisis in the climate. So today I want to just address a few questions. What insights into poetry can the pandemic give us? What insights into the pandemic can poetry give us? And how do we teach poetry in the time of and after coronavirus? So I want to start first with why poetry. Why do people turn to poetry? I think the answer lies in the very paradox of poetry. Poetry is a kind of paradox, that it's when words fail us, when we experience something that we find very hard to put into words, that's when poetry emerges. That's when we reach for poetry, when we experience something like grief, or we fall in love and words are not enough. There's no real words to describe this experience. That's when we turn to poetry, and many of us become bad poets in those kinds of moments because we have no other way to say what we want, what we are really feeling. As the great American eco-poet, M.S. Merwin, maybe, I don't know if many of you have read him, but he's a phenomenal, incredible poet. He put it, poetry is not about information. It's about expressing the inexpressible. It's when language arose, he said, to say the things that we have such a hard time saying. The improbable, the unthinkable find expression in poetry. And right now, I would say it's truly hard to find words to say what we are going through. It is improbable, it is unthinkable. How many times have you yourself uttered, I never thought something like this could happen? In the US, over 100,000, that's 1 lakh people have died due to coronavirus here in the US. And the strangeness of living in the midst of mass death and disease perhaps is a situation that is so unthinkable, improbable, and inexpressible that there are no words for it. And it's a situation perhaps uniquely suited to poetry for that reason. So there are some works that are directly about the pandemic, poetic works I've come across. I mean, there are studies on the effect of and the response to the bubonic plague, for example, throughout Europe, and specific works and how they address that. For example, in this book, Death and the Pro-Maiden Plague Poetry in England, addresses the works that and how they deal with that. A famous example is Chaucer, whose Canterbury Tales actually directly speaks about the bubonic plague. I found this other book that was written in the 1990s, Kyrie by Ellen Bryant Voigt, and it's a book of poems that imagines what it might have been like to live in 1918 during the flu pandemic. And if you read it, there's much similarities to what we are going through also there. So if you know. The other book is this one that is not published yet. It's coming out in November, but it's a collection of dozens of American poets on the coronavirus and the time of COVID. So you see that they collected this anthology rather quickly. You know, fiction and other forms of literature, they take a lot more time. They will respond, but it will take time for this. But poetry is something that has emerged, and there's been this upsurge really of poetry. But in as much as this pandemic, like pandemics in the past, is not one discrete event that you write something about, but rather an event that has seeped deeply into the culture and expressions of society, shaping our ideas of self, belonging, death, grief, love, nature, all the major themes of literary works. These were all changed by the realities of pandemics. So living now in the time of COVID, you can look back on the things you might already be teaching. And you can see the way that the major turning points in literary history were also responses in some sense to pandemics and epidemics, diseases. And I'm just going to talk about two briefly before I move on to more contemporary things. But two turning points in literary history, poetic history, Romanticism and modernism, which are relevant for understanding, I think, our conceptions of nature, at least in the Western imagination, especially. So, what is Romanticism? Just to review, I'm sure all of you know, of course, is an intellectual, artistic, literary movement that began in the late 18th century in critical response to the growth of urban industrial civilization in Europe, then America, then around the world. Romantic poets and artists rejected the scientific rationalization of nature in favor of looking at nature as a source of meaning, wisdom, healing. And there are the 5 I's associated with Romanticism. Romanticism values intuition, imagination, inspiration, individualism, idealism. We're going to return to Romanticism's conception of nature as separate from culture and civilization a little bit later. But right now, I just want to point out the ways that the poets of this period, the famous poets, William Blake, Wordsworth, Keats, Shelley, when you look at them again with post-COVID eyes, you see the ways that diseases and epidemics have shaped their ideas. In particular, their flight to nature as an escape from the disease-ridden urban life of modernity. You begin to sense in these works the way that disease figures into the anxieties of modernity, which has its birth in this period, along with the birth of industrial capitalism. Urban life is rife with disease and suffering, hard work and pollution, and all of this undergirds the romantic questioning of scientific progress. I'll give just one example. By the most well-known, one of the most well-known poets of the Romantic era, William Blake, is considered the first Romantic poet, a seer, a critic of the industrial age, who wrote about the marginalized peoples affected by urbanization and industrialization. And he was known more as an artist, actually, until he became known as a poet. His poetry came out much later, late 19th century, when critics brought him forward as a poet, but he was more known as an artist, and he did a lot of illustrations for different books. For example, this particularly relevant to our topic, The Pit of Disease, was a illustration he made for Dante's work, the Inferno and the 7 Circles of Hell. Here's another that he made on the Old Testament, where pestilence comes in and kills the firstborns of the Bible. I mean, he had a very big sense of disease and pandemic. And I just want to look briefly at this poem. Famous, I mean, you all must know this poem, of course. I wander through each chartered streets, near where the chartered Thames does flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every man, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweepers cry, every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear, how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plague the marriage hearse. This poem is often read and taught as a critique of industrialism. It presents a counter view than the dominant view of its time, that London was this, and great innovation and progress and technology and moving forward. And he gives this very dark picture of urban civilization. But again, now with post-COVID eyes, you can begin to see the ways there's so much attention now to disease, and the way that physical suffering and disease is such a part of the landscape of the urban civilization that he is critiquing and rejecting, down to, you know, the actual mentioning of the plague in the poem itself. Here, you know, I think he means something like syphilis or some other disease of that sort. But there's definitely, you know, still an attention to that. You know, so the flip, Blake didn't write a lot of poetry about nature, but he had a very strong critique of the city. And the romantics that followed, they turned to nature as a kind of pure and pristine reserve away from the vileness of urban civilization. But is no doubt connected to this anxiety of the city, of urban life, of disease that's in it. So just to turn briefly to modernism, one of the biggest poets of the modern era was T.S. Eliot, and he wrote a poem called The Wasteland. It was published in 1922, but he began writing it actually right as he recovered from the Spanish flu, the influenza epidemic that killed 50 million people. And so many soldiers, also during World War I, died from this pandemic, more so than even just the war. This is not often taught. When you teach modernism, you teach about the war. You teach about World War I, but you don't really talk about this pandemic that was going on at the same time. But The Wasteland is very much steeped in the reality of the pandemic of that time period. I mean, it is this diseased land that he's talking about, full of corpses. I just picked out a few. I'm not going to read all of these, but you know, a few quotes in The Wasteland. But it's, you know, it's white bodies naked on the low damp ground, and bones cast in a little low dry garret. You know, I had not thought death had undone so many. I think we are in Rat's Alley where the dead men lose their bones. So I'm sorry, to go back. It's everywhere in the poem. It's steeped in the poem. Again, here, this poem also has a view of nature as being somehow, it's this call to nature to sluggishly arise from the death that is the modern era, that is the pandemic, that is the World War I. I mean, it's not one thing, it's many things, but definitely is a factor here. There are many other poems. I mean, William Carlos Williams' poem, Spring and All, another famous poem, begins with the line, "On the way to the contagious hospital." Again, written in the same time period, clearly responding to the pandemic. And all of these poems are also about a turn to nature as a way of rejuvenation, a way of getting out of the disease of the pandemic. They're hallmarks of the Western literary tradition. All of them grew out of Romanticism. And these, all the way to the genre of eco-poetry, show the ways that critiques of Western industrialism and capitalism is tied to its depiction of disease and death-ridden urban spaces. So nature becomes a refuge and escape. In the words of Wordsworth, the anchor of my purest thoughts, the nurse, the guide, the guardian of my soul, of my moral being. This is a theme I think we see reemerging in a new and sometimes very problematic way with the coronavirus. Right now, we're seeing a whole new genre of poetry taking shape around the world. Some of these, and much of it is digital and being sent out into digital spaces. So we have this phenomenon of the viral poem, which is an interesting analogy considering that it's about a virus and it's spreading, like all over social media. So I mentioned this book already, Together in a Sudden Strangeness, American Poets Respond to the Pandemic. This is not out yet, but it's coming out. And one of the poets included in it is one of my favorite writers, Julia Alvarez, who's a Chicana Latin American writer. And she has this poem that is already available on the internet. Will poetry go viral? Will its disease infect us? Will it help build up antibodies against indifference? Will poems be the only safe spaces where we can gather together? And you see that people turn to this poetry in this time where there's a kind of turning inward because we're all in lockdown, so to speak. So some of you may have already seen this poem. Next poem I want to talk about by Tom. He calls himself probably Tom Foolery as his name. I don't know. I can't see everybody, but have you seen this?
Tell me the one about the Mars.
You're growing weary, sleepy thoughts about your head.
Please, that one's my favorite. I promise just once more.
Okay, snuggle down, my boy, though I know you know full well. The story starts before then, in a world I once would dwell. It was a world of waste and wonder, poverty and plenty, back before we understood why hindsight's 2020. You see, the people came up with companies to trade across all lands, but they swelled and got much bigger than we ever could have planned. We'd always had our wants, but now it got so quick. You could have anything you dreamed of in a day, and with a click. We noticed families had stopped talking. That's not to say they never spoke, but the meaning must have melted, and the work-life balance broke. The children's eyes grew squarer. Every toddler had a phone. They filtered out the imperfections, but amidst the noise, they felt alone. And every day the skies grew thicker, till you couldn't see the stars. So we flew in planes to find them, while down below, we filled our cars. We'd drive around all day in circles. We'd forgotten how to run. We swapped the grass for tarmac, shrunk the parks till there were none. We filled the sea with plastic, because our waste was never capped, until each day when you went fishing, you'd pull them out, already wrapped. And while we drank and smoked and gambled, our leaders taught us why. It's best to not upset the lobbies. Convenient to die. But then in 2020, a new virus came our way. The governments reacted and told us all to hide away. While we all were hidden, amidst the fear, and all the while, the people dusted off their instincts. They remembered how to smile. They started clapping to say thank you and calling up their mums. And while the car keys gathered dust, they would look forward to their runs. And with the skies less full of voyagers, the earth began to breathe, and the beaches bore new wildlife that scuttled off into the seas. Some people started dancing. Some were singing, some were baking. We'd grown so used to bad news, but some good news was in the making. And so when we found the cure and were allowed to go outside, we all preferred the world we found to the one we left behind. Old habits became extinct, and they made way for the new. And every simple act of kindness was now given its due.
But why did it take a virus to bring the people back together?
Sometimes you've got to get sick, my boy, before you start feeling better. Now lie down and dream of tomorrow and all the things that we can do. And who knows, if you dream hard enough, maybe some of them will come true. We now call it the Great Realization. And yes, since then there have been many. That's the story of how it started and why hindsight's 2020.
if you look at the camera, they know someone's filming it because they can see you.
Exactly. If you look at the camera, they know someone's filming it. Okay, lie back down.
So this poem has had over 6 million views or something like that. It has attracted the attention of Hollywood stars like Jennifer Aniston, and they elevated this guy, this poet, and now he's going to be putting that poem as a children's book, and he's publishing it. And I'm beginning with this video here because it articulates one common realization that the pandemic has brought, especially to the West, but I think worldwide, that as humans are in lockdown, the earth is healing. Or as an Indian poet that I found, again, another video of Minu Bakshi put it, Kudrat ka dekho intakam, asman safed ho gaya, parinde khule hawa mein, aur insan kaid ho gaya. And it's a kind of realization about the antagonistic relationship between humans and nature. But where this Minu Bakshi presents this reality with some sense of irony. I think this poet tomfoolery presents the virus as ultimately and essentially a good thing. That in the long run, hindsight is 2020, he says. It's an experience that's going to make humans better. It's going to teach us something. We're going to have a realization about our basic values. But the world after the pandemic will probably not return to nature. Again, as our opening panel was talking about, the more we're in lockdown, the more we are being absorbed into the digital spaces and into technology, not nature. So that's, there's some problematic aspects to that. But it is true that the earth seems to be healing. Pollution has declined. You can see the skies and the stars at night. The ozone is healing. Wildlife is free and flourishing. Many ecologists and scientists point out that this COVID outbreak is also the beginning of many such outbreaks in which viruses move from animals to humans, such as Ebola, SARS, avian flu, and others before this, due to humans' continuing encroachment into wild habitats. The destruction of diverse habitats, forests, mangroves, grasslands, by humans, the alarming rate of extinction of species, the destruction of biodiversity because of human expansion and development, the disruption of ecosystems due to climate change, the wildlife markets where humans are trading pets and food as pets and food animals they have no evolutionary relationship with. These are all some of the factors that have led to this pandemic in the first place. We invade, one writer, David Quammen, who wrote back in 2012, wrote this book called Spillover: Animal Infections in the Next Pandemic. We invade tropical forests and other wild landscapes which harbor so many species of animals and plants. And within those creatures, so many unknown viruses. We cut the trees, we kill the animals or cage them and send them to markets. We disrupt ecosystems and we shake viruses loose from their natural hosts. When that happens, they need a new host, and often we are it. I mean, this is a different, and I think an important perspective given the, I think I see it also from my family in India, but it's also in the US, this vilification of Asian Americans, especially the Chinese, this kind of racism against the Chinese and the blaming of the Chinese, when the problem of the pandemic is far deeper than that. And a virus like this can originate almost anywhere given the human activities with nature. So COVID is making us think about our relationship to the earth and to the destructive ways of humans. And in so doing, COVID is making very timely the genre of poetry that in the 1990s came to be called eco-poetry. Just an overview, what is eco-poetry? It's poetry that addresses environmental crises as well as values the importance of the non-human world. Eco-poets see the relationship between humans and nature as fraught. They often see humans as a destructive force on nature. Eco-poetry is often activist and socially engaged poetry that seeks to have an impact on the world. And eco-poets express ethical concern for the non-human world. They acknowledge responsibility for human-caused anthropogenic environmental destruction, and they directly address issues like climate change, deforestation, pollution, and other environmental issues. Oops, sorry. So I think though, you know, in the tomfoolery poem, we're getting there's a problem in that poem that is also in the genre of eco-poetry and has to do with the relationship of the West to the rest of the world. Tomfoolery skips over the realities of the pandemic in his poem. The ways that class, race, gender, caste, colonialism have made some humans more vulnerable to the virus, indeed more vulnerable to environmental destruction on the whole. In the US, for example, African Americans are 3 times more likely to die of COVID than any other group. And all over the world, including in India, it's the poor and marginalized who are suffering the most. In India, the COVID crisis is being compounded also now by these storms that are related to the climate change. So that raises the question, if COVID is nature's lesson, why is nature punishing the most vulnerable and those least responsible for the environmental destruction? I started with that popular poem here because it shows the ways that the pandemic is itself raising some of the central issues and controversies within eco-poetry and within the environmental movement in the West. Tomfoolery's easy optimism, the fact that this easy optimism inspired the elite of Hollywood, shows a disturbing indifference to the suffering and death of hundreds of thousands right now. His poem has actually erased this suffering, and the optimism in it sits on the corpses of those who have died, not only due to the disease itself, but due to the dislocations in its wake. Refugees, migrants, prisoners, elders in nursing homes, the poor, those without healthcare, dying also of other diseases that have not gone away. So the view of nature in poems like his, and there are many, looks at it as an entity separate and distinct, a kind of byproduct here also of the romantic conception of nature. Nature as source of healing is in our world a privilege afforded to those with means and with leisure, but it's also a sort of impoverished concept of nature, the view of an outsider looking in. But one writer, Samantha Walton, you know, she's written about the ways that poets now and critics have begun to chart alternative histories of eco-poetry, broadening out the initial emphasis on the romantic heritage, recognizing the contributions of women and poets of color, incorporating more intersectional approaches to nature and ecology. So there are a host of poets that offer this more intersectional approach to understanding our relationship to nature and the future of the earth. That I think if in post-COVID times, if we're serious about addressing this ethically, we're bound to research that and bring that into our syllabi. In India, the poetic outpouring has been immense on social media. I haven't even been able to follow all of it. There's like so much. There's a Twitter tag called like COVID poetry, and so many poets are writing. But I do see emerging out of that a more grounded perspective, one that brings out the tragic contours of it, that focus on the crisis of the migrants, for example. In the US, I haven't seen the same attention to the marginalized in the poetry that's coming out. But the book, I don't know, I haven't read the book yet, so it hasn't come out. But herein lies the challenge of teaching poetry and eco-poetry in post-COVID times. I'll end with an excerpt of a poem by the poet Craig Santos Perez. He's an indigenous Chamorro poet from Guam, because in it we can see that this disease and this pandemic is not something new to the indigenous peoples of the Americas, many of whom were decimated by diseases brought by the European colonizers. The so-called apocalypse that's, people fear is something that's already happened to whole peoples, the first peoples of the Americas, for example, to the enslaved brought to the Americas. The decimation of nature has gone hand in hand with the decimation of cultures and ethnicities. So what does this history mean now in post-COVID times? And this is a question I think, would take a much longer talk to have to address. But it is a question that should be at the forefront of teaching eco-poetry in post-COVID times. So it's a poem it's a much longer poem. I'm just going to read a few lines of it here. But it's a poem that the poet wrote about a documentary on climate change called This Changes Everything. It's a documentary by Naomi Klein. It's a very popular documentary amongst progressive people in the US. He says, my wife and I take our 2-year-old, oops, sorry. My wife and I take our 2-year-old to the first Hawaii screening of Naomi. I'm sorry, I can't read this because half of it is being covered by the pictures. Naomi Klein's documentary. The line for the documentary is long, almost as long as the Hawaii endangered species list. Unlike the endangered species list, there aren't many natives in this line. Of all the white people here, I'd estimate that 99% of them want to save the earth, while the other 1% are critical of salvation discourse. The theater feels small and uncomfortably full, like an overbooked arc. The white people around us start coughing, which triggers intergenerational trauma and inherited flight instincts in my body. Our daughter starts to become restless too. So my wife breastfeeds her until she falls asleep. I too have always kind of hated films about climate change, not because they feature cliche polar bears, but because they're all made by white people. In the climate movement, indigenous peoples are the new polar bears. So this, I think what's really interesting in this poem, especially is this, is this line about the white people starting to cough. We're in a situation, right? Whenever we hear anybody cough now, we're very frightened about this. This was a poem written before the pandemic, by the way. So it's not referencing currently the pandemic, but what it is referencing is the way that that coughing triggers intergenerational trauma. And he's referring there to the diseases that decimated native populations when the Europeans arrived, and how trauma, scientists have shown, is epigenetic. It travels through our DNA and we pass it down. And so he's referencing that the perspective of a indigenous person towards, here he's saying climate change, but also towards something like a pandemic is different. It has this deeper history to it. And then his daughter is become restless too. So you see the passing down of the trauma intergenerationally there. So that's just an example, I think, of ways that we can bring the COVID realities into our literature classrooms. And I'll just leave it there and ask if, I don't know if we have a question and answer session or how we're doing this. So.
Hello.
Sonali sir, start.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much, ma'am, for your valuable, informative and insightful presentation and guidance. Now, I would like to request chairperson of this session, Honorable Dr. Vaishali Naik ma'am, to give her comments and share her views.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Am I audible to everybody?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for giving me this wonderful opportunity. I would like to thank all the organizers, especially PDS Baburauji Golub College, that has been my academic and professional home for the last 22 years. I'll start my brief talk with a brief response to today's theme before moving on to the wonderful presentation made by Professor Madhuri Deshmukh. I think it's a great initiative to have a very informed and scholarly discourse on this topic that we have today, which is post-pandemic rejuvenation of higher education, a global perspective. The term rejuvenation, I feel, brings a paradigm shift and puts us in a very proactive and positive perspective on this pandemic. It is indeed heartening to see that on this platform, we are trying to go beyond the technical logistics of online education to encompass larger and more urgent issues of rethinking and revamping the purpose, meaning, and location of education today. And I think poetry accords this space to us, where the information component can be changed to have a real conversation with the students. The psyche of young minds affected undesirably by these critical times can be healed with the space of poetry. There's just an earnest appeal to all of you. Let us not neglect and relegate the soul of education to the background while juggling with the technical paraphernalia in this new phase of education. This reminds me of Robert Browning's Andrea del Sarto, the beautiful monologue, dramatic monologue, where Andrea sees his art as beautiful, but spiritually empty. He feels it lacks soul. I quote from the poem, "That arm is wrongly put, and there again, a fault to pardon in the drawing's lines. Its body, so to speak, its soul is right. He means right, that a child may understand." So this rejuvenation will be meaningful if we manage to retain the soul amidst the crowd of technological tools. Now, let me turn to this wonderful presentation made by Professor Madhuri Deshmukh from Oakton University. Thank you, madam, going across and transgressing all the time zones and having an unearthly hour of past midnight to have this scholarly talk with us. Thank you so much. Her topic was teaching poetry in the pandemic, eco-poetic and the future of the earth. Professor Madhuri walked us through her presentation in a very scholarly and lucid manner. She started by tracing the relatively weak interaction between pandemic and literature. And basically, she posited her entire presentation on three very thought-provoking parameters. First, the mutual insight, the insight between poetry, what poetry brings to pandemic. Second, what pandemic brings to poetry. And finally, how do we teach poetry right now? I understand and I appreciate the paradox where she talks about how poetry is expressing the inexpressible. So by very its own genesis, poetry is a paradox. It's a wonderful tool to have in today's times, especially in pandemic times. Through her, we really had a very good relooking at poetry through the lens of pandemic. She started relooking right from, I think, Chaucer, and then we went on to Romantic Age, William Blake. There was a very revealing look at Blake's paintings and poems. Thank you, ma'am. Especially also the illustrations from the wasteland were very insightful. Then there were other poets. I personally liked a very subtle and sensitive video, which is doing the round today on YouTube and Facebook, but which is a very subtle and sensitive video on how humanity should remember the pandemic, because it's not only necessary to go through the storm, but you have to really, really assess now, after a few days, few months, and few years, how do you look back at 2020? So this video gives us a wonderful location from where we can look at this pandemic times. She has wonderfully talked about other poets, other contemporary poets and authors. The poem by Perez was also very candid about going for the documentary on ecosystem. And yeah, that reminds me, this is a very important moment today, where on the day of Environmental Day, she has chosen this very pertinent topic to talk about eco-poetry. That was wonderful. And finally, I feel that at the end of her talk, what my take-home lesson is, and which is a very important lesson, that when we are talking about alternative histories, when we are talking down the lane, how we look at this particular epoch in human history, it is not a very fortunate epoch, but in a way, yes, we all are witnessing history. in various ways. So when we look back at this particular epoch, and we as teachers, as students, as writers and readers of literature and language, when we try to write alternate histories, we try to write alternatives we have for narrating this particular epoch, I believe that this space is very competently provided by poetry and especially eco poetry. That is my take home lesson from Professor Madhuri's talk, and I feel that it was a really wonderful and revealing talk. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Naik ma'am, for your comments and views. Now we are moving to question answer session. Due to time constraints, only 2 questions will be answered. For that, I would like to request Dr. Prashant to take over. Dr. Prashant.
See the QA box. KD, you please request Deshmukh madam.
No, Dr. Prashant will handle.
No, Q&A box they can check.
Oh,
Deshmukh madam.
I don't see any questions.
Okay. There are no questions. Questions, sir?
Hello.
Huh?
Are there any questions for this session?
There's no questions in the
Is
box.
there any
No.
question?
There are?
There are no questions in this session.
No.
Okay.
Okay then.
Okay. Then I once again extend my heartiest gratitude towards our resource person, Dr. Madhuri Deshmukh ma'am, and chairperson, Dr. Vaishali Naik ma'am. On the behalf of organizing committee, I am very thankful to both of them. Finally, I would also extend my heartiest thanks to all the participants for their valuable participation. Thank you to all of you. Friends, with this first session are over. For second session, I would like to hand over Professor Vaibhavi Kale, madam.
Good afternoon, sir.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, all of you. I welcome you all on behalf of PDA's Baburauji Gholab College, Sangvi, and Cluster of English Language and Literature on this occasion of International Web Conference on Post-Pandemic Rejuvenation of Higher Education, Global Perspective. For this plenary session, we have 2 eminent speakers, Dr. Sushumna Kannan and Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi. I would like to introduce you to Dr. Sushumna Kannan, adjunct faculty at the Department of Women's Studies at San Diego State University, San Diego, USA. She has a PhD in Cultural Studies from Center for the Study of Culture and Society, Bangalore, India. Her research is on the South Asian devotional traditions and feminist epistemology focused on the medieval. She is an academician, researcher, creative writer, translator. 18 translations, 23 feature writings, 9 fiction reviews, film and TV program reviews to her credit. She received the Bourse Myra French Research Fellowship in 2006 and 2007 and the Sir Ratan Tata Fellowship for PhD coursework and writing in 2003 and 2007. She had published her research on Bhakti Dharma Shastras, ethics, women's writing in Kannada and English, and on translation theory in peer-reviewed journals as book chapters. She is currently working on a book project on Hinduism and violence, forthcoming in 2020. We have Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi here as a chairperson for this session. He is working as an assistant professor and head of the department at Sri Mata Vaishno Devi University, India. His research interests include language documentation, writing descriptive grammars, and the preservation of rare and endangered languages in South Asia. He has contributed papers to many science citations and research articles to knowledge resources, chiefly EBSCO, and to encyclopedias, chiefly with Sage, Roman and Littlefield, Springer, and ABC CLIO publications. So now I request Honorable Speaker Dr. Sushumna to come up with her topic. Dr. Sushumna, please.
Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. So thank you for the opportunity to be speaking with all of you here. I'm going to start by talking about conceptions of nature in Indian literature. But because I don't want to repeat myself, repeat the presentation of Dr. Madhuri Deshmukh in part, especially the part that had to do with romanticism and modernism. I want to stick to the classical Indian literature and show you how, contrary to Amitav Ghosh's statement that climate change has missed literary imagination, there is a lot of thinking in classical India about the environment, about nature, animals, and how we should live with it. So one of the interesting things about the COVID-19 is also that it forces us to look at resources that we might have ignored until now. And I think that classical Indian literature now poses itself as an important resource that we have ignored until now. One of the reasons for this is, of course, colonialism. A second reason is because classical Indian literature is mixed with other disciplines. It's mixed with religious or magico-realistic thinking. And it is mixed with medicine, with indigenous forms of astronomy, astrology, and so on and so forth. And it's very hard to demarcate these multiple disciplines that are kind of mixed together, which is why, you know, the classical Indian literature of India remains less studied. When I was teaching in India about a decade ago, two of the texts from indigenous Indian literature was present in our syllabus. One was the Manusmriti, and the sole reason that it was there was because it was discriminating against women, and that needed to be highlighted. And the other text was a Bhakti text from medieval India, again to raise questions of gender. So these are very valid and legitimate questions to ask, but there is so much else in the text, for instance, in Manusmriti, that we have ignored because we have very easily labeled the text as, you know, casteist, anti-women, and patriarchal, and so on. So let me start by making a few points about how nature was thought about in classical Indian literature. One of the very first institutions we meet in Vedic literature is the Vedic sacrifice. And this institution has been understood in very negative terms because, you know, there is animal sacrifice, plant sacrifice, and so on. But when you look very carefully at what is going on in the Vedic sacrifice, it's very interesting. It's not all that prejudiced, because for instance, there is a very clear understanding that we are killing plants and animals, that they are suffering pain, and that they have life, and so on. Which itself, the very admission of the violence that we are committing on nature and on these other beings, and there is also an apology rendered to all of these beings that we are killing you, we apologize, and so on. And there is also a request to the deities. So the Rigvedic poets make a request to the deities, asking them that they teach them a non-violent form of sacrificing. So we see already that the early seeds of ahimsa are sown within ritual circles. Not only this, there is a very deep understanding of the cow as an important animal right within the early Vedic texts. And the cow is compared to the mother, and therefore killing her for any other purpose other than the Vedic sacrifice is condemned. So cow veneration is an extremely important aspect of the early classical literature. In addition to this, there is a very clear statement that only non-germinating seeds should be put into the Vedic sacrifice, which is Havir Yagna. And then the idea there, underlying idea for the Vedic sacrifice is that the plants and animals sacrificed go to heaven. And the underlying idea is that, of course, this is mired in religion, but what we need to pull out of this is the very deep understanding of how plants and animals are treated equally to human beings, that they crave for liberation or moksha, or if not moksha, at least heaven. And they would like to go to heaven, which is why when sacrificed, they do end up in heaven. And that is the reason why. There is another nuance here that is also interesting. There is an idea of formally asking for permission of the plant or the animal that is being sacrificed. And this is true for human beings as well. So the family of a human being who is being sacrificed is requested for permission. So there is a lot of recognition of the kind of subjectivity that all these different living beings, which is why when sacrificed. Okay, sorry, I just heard my own voice there for a moment. So there is an underlying understanding that these beings are equal to us. They have consciousness. They feel pain and pleasure exactly like we do. And that we want to, that it is natural for them to crave moksha, that it is natural for all living beings to go to the next level of being wherein there is no pain and no pleasure, a state beyond pain and pleasure. And in this, we are very unique because unlike Western civilization, we don't hierarchize. There is no anthropocentrism in early Vedic institutions. And this is really a very, very unique idea to India. We believe that there is consciousness in plants and animals, just like we have, and that there is that, except for the fact that plants can't move, that animals can move, and that we have more sense organs, not intelligence or intellect, but just more bodily sense organs. There is no difference between us and the natural world. So human beings are considered a part of the natural world. And when we look at the Vedic sacrifice very carefully, the underlying idea is simply this, that we are all part of a food chain and that some amount of violence to nature is inevitable. So unlike, very romantic and naive ideas that today's environmentalism sometimes, begins to argue, it is not possible for us to live on this earth without some amount of violence. But the question is, how much violence? And how can the violence that we already do be minimized? This was the question that we had. And some solutions were proposed. I will come to that in a little bit. But I want to talk about the food chain that the Vedic institutions saw as inevitable, that small fish are eaten by big fish are eaten by other sea animals, and then it goes on, the hierarchy, the food chain goes on until man is also consuming animals and plants and other products, and man himself is consumed by someone else higher than him or her, and that is the devas or gods. So this is really interesting because and there's a certain genuineness to this understanding. We might go on debating about how valid this kind of thinking is, but that's not the idea here. What we must understand is that someone higher and above us is also considered. And this notion of non-anthropocentrism is something that we don't find in the West. In the West, and even in Judaic religions, man is the crown of the creation. That man was created to dominate the natural world and to take over, to take care of it, as it were, to administrate and so on. These are the ideas that are there in the West and in Western intellectual history, but this is completely missing in the Indian classical literature. So the maintenance of this food chain is considered very important. And one of the solutions to this food chain problem, that is the inevitability of violence that is there in nature, is that we should stop meat eating. Now, this is kind of one solution. Another solution, and this is a solution that was proposed for the Brahmin, for just one section of our communities. For another component that was there, the ascetic, the sannyasi, he was to eat only once a day. In other words, eating itself is consuming from the world, it's taking from the world, and it's problematic. The Vedic world, three kinds of beings: the human beings, the devas, and the demons or the asuras. And everything, their relationship with each other and the way, their very nature, all of these things were related to how much they were consuming and how they were consuming and whether it is leading to a sustainable model or not. So for instance, humans have a problem in giving. And this is the understanding that the Vedic world comes up with. And asuras are evil because they are grabbing food, and the devas receive only what is given to them happily. This is why the devas are elevated, the asuras are evil. And this kind of interesting understanding is really very interesting, because we talk a lot about good and evil in English literature classes, and we tend to think that somehow classical Indian literature or this semi-literature, religious literature has a very black and white notion of good and evil, but that's not true. When we look at these literatures with decolonized eyes, what we see is that evil is that which is grabbing and consuming resources. So for instance, the demon Vritra is someone who is stopping rains, and all the beings on earth are dying. As a result of which Indra has to destroy these demons so that all the living beings on earth can then, live. Then again, the demon Vritra is consuming space. He has become huge, and he has occupied all the space on earth. That's why Indra slays him, is because this is unsustainable. This is not done at all. And similarly, there's another idea in the Vedic world which says that we are all born with debts. So one of the debts is, of course, to your ancestors, to the devas and so on, but also to the rivers, to water. And this is such an important thing. We tend to miss these nuances that are there. But when we begin to look at it, when we begin to look at classical Indian literature by retaining the structure of their thinking, but missing out on the mythical aspects, then we are able to see so much more going on. So for instance, if you just take out Ritra, the demon, and replace him with a structure of just a demon, an evil person, and what he's doing and why he should be the demon, then we begin to see why our literature, ancient, medieval, is shaped the way it is. And then again, this debt is something that some of the debts everybody has to pay, all the 4 varnas. Of course, we know about the varnashrava dharma that was there. All the 4 varnas have to pay. But some specific debts, more debts, the Brahmins have to pay. So it seems to me that the Brahmins who vowed non-violence without meat eating, and in every other way they had to be non-violent, and they had to perform sacrifices. And these animal sacrifices, because they had violence in them, they were impure. And these impurities, the Brahmin had to bear. So our typical understanding of caste system, following from Dumo, is that the Brahmin is on the top of the hierarchy and he's some kind of oppressor. But when you actually look at Vedic literature, the Brahmin comes out as a very as a very pious person who cannot own wealth, who has to only earn by performing sacrifices, the dakshina that is given to him. He has to be poor. He cannot accumulate wealth, and he cannot eat meat. He cannot do violence. And if he does violence, then he cannot perform the Vedic sacrifice. Now, the Vedic sacrifice is important because it is a way of accessing the higher world. And the Brahmin cannot do the Vedic, cannot perform the Vedic sacrifice if he's, stopping the non-violence. Now, take a look at the other end of the spectrum, which is the ascetic. The ascetic goes out of the society, and like I said, he consumes very little. In fact, the Vedas and later Dharmashastra texts mention that there are some groups of ascetics who live only on water. There are others who, like a python, live only on air. And there are yet others who live on roots and who live on found food. They are called gleaners. If an apple has fallen down on the ground, they take it and they consume it. They never pluck it out of the tree, intentionally with the intention of eating. This is another spectrum. And then there were Kshatriyas who could commit violence, but only for protection and punishment. Whether it is on, whether even hunting, although Kshatriyas were allowed hunting, they could only do that for target practice and in order to, develop courage, valor, and these other qualities, not for violence. If they did it with the intention of violence, then they suffer. If they don't do it with the intention of violence and they die on the battlefield, then they reach heaven. So this was the understanding of violence, not just towards nature, but towards other human beings as well. So basically, by the time of the Arthashastra, it is very clear that ahimsa is a samanya dharma. It is a dharma common to all. All the 4 varnas have to practice it, but there is a slightly different emphasis. Now, the Brahmin has to perform Vedic sacrifices, and the impurities that result from performing violence there, because he's killing animals and plants, that violence, he has to bear the burden of that. The karma of that, he takes on himself, and he has to perform expiations all the time so that he can regain his state of, semblance of purity. Now, the Kshatriya again has to do it as duty, and only in order to protect his people from enemies and to see that justice is delivered as punishment. So even hunting for him, like I said, is just limited. He cannot just do anything he wants. So similarly, and then the Vaishyas were people who were again in non-violent professions, and then the Shudras were again menial laborers. So these actually lower castes did not suffer from the problems that the so-called higher castes that suffered from. They had to do much more to bring themselves to a state of normalcy that the other two didn't have to do it at all. Which is why we hear a lot that for the Shudra, just the performance of a fast is enough. That if a Shudra performs a fast that is equivalent to the Brahmin's sacrifice or the ascetics, tapasya. So we see this kind of talk a lot because they actually mean it. These Vedic institutions actually mean what they say, and there is a very consistent understanding of this kind of division of labor, and this is the division of labor actually that that the Vedic institutions are talking about. Now, in the Bhumi Sukta of the Vedas, we see a prayer that we are now agriculture in the Vedic world, and this is something that probably as modern people we will laugh, because they thought that agriculture is causing injury to the earth. So we must not practice agriculture unless it is absolutely necessary. So again, gleaners were very important. So I don't know if you know about this. Even today, if you're doing the Bhumi Puja for a certain building or something like that, the workers are very, very aware. They will dig the earth, but they will also apologize to the earth. And they will do it in certain muhurtas, and they will not do it in certain other times because they think that the violence will hit them harder. The violence of it attaches to them as karma in a very serious way if they do it in certain times. So agriculture was considered, agriculture is thought of in anthropology as the beginning of civilization and so on and so forth. Whereas here in the Vedic world, it harms the earth. So we must do as little agriculture as possible. And in the Bhumi Gita, there is a prayer to the earth saying, as I dig this earth, may I not harm it too much. Similarly, there are many verses which say that when we go to the forest, we must request the trees for fruits. And for when we cut the wood, because we need wood, we must request it. And when we go to the trees with non-violence, the queen of the forest, the goddess of the forest, gives all that we ask of her willingly. But when we go with the intent of violence, then the karma of it kind of attaches to us, and we have to suffer for it later. So basically, like I said, many of the castes could not pursue self-interest, but some could pursue self-interest. The lower castes, the so-called lower castes, could pursue self-interest. So for instance, if you're talking about meat eating, the Brahmin could not eat meat, the others could. But that was because the Brahmin was kind of taking over the sins in some sense. And by performing Vedic sacrifices, he was sustaining the universe in a certain way. So some of us were pursuing self-interest, some of us were giving it up voluntarily, like the Brahmin and the ascetic. And therefore, there was some kind of balance. Not everybody was consuming. So this was the understanding in the Vedic world. Sorry, just give me a moment. As we go on to medieval literature, we find, or even before medieval literature, long before medieval literature, we just have to look at Manusmriti and the Mahabharata, which speaks extensively about meat eating. Meat eating is condemned. In fact, in the Manusmriti, it says that those who eat meat are attracting a lot of sinfulness towards them, towards themselves. And then he concludes by saying that his section on meat eating, he concludes it by saying that meat eating is okay for some communities, but giving it up altogether is what is advised. It's sort of seen as a contradiction in Manusmriti, but if you carefully read the text, you will see that that meat eating is quite clearly condemned. But at the same time, some communities can also go about, because after all, this is the food chain that we must preserve. In the Dharma Shastras, there is also another idea of ensuring the water. It says that when we get into water to take a bath, we have to do so very slowly, and we should not beat ourselves with water, because that injures the water. And this is one of the reasons, this is also followed by Jains. Jains are very careful about taking a bath, mainly because they think that taking a bath actually injures the water. And similarly, there is a lot of ahimsa ideas coming from Buddhism as well. But vegetarianism and meat eating is not necessarily connected in Buddhism. In Jainism, it's very strong. So we see that all of them thought that eating food is itself, consuming, taking, and so on. So the one other idea in the Vedic sacrifice is that the demons are grabbing their food, and that the devas are receiving whatever is given to them gracefully. And when they have excess, they give it back to us. So this is, another attribute why the devas were considered superior to human beings. The devas are superior because they are not greedy, and the demons are greedy by nature, which is why they are demons in the first place. So, and again, the Manusmriti talks at length about how hunting is a vice for the king, and he has to practice it moderately, and he has to hunt and make that animal offering to a sacrificial Brahmin. He has to bring the animal and to give it to the sacrifice so that it doesn't go waste, so that it goes to the devas and becomes food for them. So on so many levels, we see an understanding of a sustainable model that we are only now beginning to talk about in modern disciplines. And then gleaning is recommended for kings. So one might think that this is only for ascetics or for Brahmins, but actually kings could become gleaners. There is a lot of mention of how good kings were also gleaners. And in the Mahabharata especially, kings are supposed to have given away their own flesh from their body for other animals to consume, so that they don't go hungry, because those animals approach these kings for something, for food, and that is not denied. So almost all the varnas have to participate in giving. This was the rule for human beings. Hmm. And there is another idea in the Mahabharata that's also very interesting. The end of a yuga is spoken of as a period when there is overpopulation on earth, and Mother Earth, unable to bear the burden of excessive population, wipes out a lot of human beings. So in this, this is again very non-anthropocentric, because the idea here is that not that we should kill all the animals, not that we should go to the wild and kill animals there, but that human beings are going to be erased from time to time, just so Mother Earth can recover from the heaviness that we put upon her. There is also another idea of Vana and Upavana, which is very interesting. Now, today Upavana means parks and Vana means the forest. Now, this is actually very interesting because the two don't mix. And what problems we see today with COVID-19 is partly caused by these two arenas, clashing and mixing, and so we could not go into Vana in an encroaching manner. So if Rama went to the forest, he went there almost in an ascetic mode. So the ascetic who went to the forest, or the Vanaprasthi who went to the forest, did not change the forest into something else to suit his needs. It was a challenge for him or her to adapt to those harsh conditions. And that was the idea. So the Vanaprasthi, or the Aranyaka Upanishads that we see, that the emphasis on forest life and so on, or the hermit in a forest and so on, none of these were actually changing the forest in any way. Very unlike what industrialization and capitalism did in the modern era, and what we do today in the name of development. So on the whole, I believe that the literature of ancient and medieval India show us the way, or as to how we should be with our natural environment. There is ecology as a discipline. There is protection of nature, genuine concern for the environment. There is deep thinking about how a sustainable model can be worked out. And nature has intrinsic value. Animals and other plants and all living beings have a right to be on this planet as much as we do. It is not a utilitarian understanding. They are not saying that animals are important to us because we can do something with them, we can eat them or anything like that. No, they just have to be there. And then in the Ramayana, there's a certain episode when Rama is occupying a certain part of the forest. He's killing a lot of deer because that is food for him. And then the deers come to Rama and talk to him and tell him, look, we are the last of the species. If you kill us, there will be no more of this kind of deer on earth. Please take care, go hunt elsewhere. At which point of time Rama apologizes profusely and says, how could I have been so ignorant? I'm never going to kill any of you deer ever again. And so these kinds of stories are just numerous, and it's kind of tragic that we haven't read these resources carefully until now. I just want to end by talking about I just want to end by talking about the medieval saint Akka Mahadevi, on whom I did a lot of work. Like I said, enlightenment is a natural urge that all living beings have. This is the understanding in the Hindu world, in the classical literary world. And when Akka Mahadevi attains enlightenment, she becomes one with the hills and forests of Sri Shailam. She merges apparently with the natural world. I think this is very, very profound, that the highest state of being, the state of being that is beyond heaven, beyond pleasure and pain, is something that is, emerging with nature. This kind of oneness with nature, I haven't seen models of this anywhere in Western poetry. This is definitely unique to us. And in a lot of discussions that I see here in the US, there is a looking to India for some answers. And I think it's high time that we kind of produce those answers and looked at these texts carefully, include some of them in our syllabus. Post-COVID, if we are going to change ourselves, then this has to be one way we are going to do it, because this is indigenous, this is ours. If we are not going to read it, who is going to, right? So we need to look at all of this again and understand who we truly are, why ahimsa is so important, and why abstaining from excessive meat eating, the moderation of it, why that is important, and so on and so forth. And instead of just, looking at these from the perspective of extremely rational positions, we must look at it from a more holistic perspective, because from a rational position, why is meat eating wrong? Well, it may not be wrong, right? You can argue against it. But when you look at it from a deeper holistic perspective, it is wrong on so many levels, on ethical and moral levels. So we have to move beyond the rational, excessive rationalization, I think, to look at what we truly have, the resources that we truly have. Yeah, I'd like to end there. I don't want to repeat points about romantic literature and modern literature, because Ms. Deshmukh already covered it. So any questions?
Dr. Sushumna, this is Vinita Vasantani here. Actually, I want to congratulate you. This was from a very Indian point of view, and I am happy that somebody could do this here at an international level. And yes, of course, but for this, our youth has to read the Indian philosophy and mythology, then only the things can proceed. If we go back to nature, no doubt that this situation will improve in future, right? Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you for your presentation on the less studied and less explored topic of Indian classical literature. Now I would like to invite Dr. Amitabh Dwivedi for his comments and for his speech. Amitabh, sir? Hello.
Yeah. Good afternoon, all of you. And I congratulate Sushma Kannan for an insightful session, because this Hinduism and the tribal religion is also one of my favorite topic. Since I have contributed to Encyclopedia of Hinduism and Tribal Religion, published by Springer, and I contributed around 90,000 words. And I wrote on various topics, various chapters, including violence, bhog, food, and everything. And there are certain things that I would like to say, to highlight, which were not the part of Sushma Kannan's presentation. First, she talked about Hinsa, and this concept of Hinsa is Hinsa is only for basically for if you want to drive away your enemies, like starting from Rigved, like why should you go for Hinsa? Why should you do Hinsa? It is basically if you want to drive away your enemies or you want to defeat your enemies, that is basically the reference for Hinsa that we have. Otherwise, though Krishna in Bhagavad Gita also talks about like for the protection of the good and for the destruction of the evil doers, like I am born. And he also talks about like it's like an obligatory duty of everyone to curb what is bad. But there are various other ways, like, so Hinsa is only the last step. Hinsa is not the first thing. Hinsa is always the last. First, you need to go for some like peaceful negotiation, then to appease the enemy, fine. Some strategic and political treaties that you need to maintain, fine. Or you need to just infill fear in the mind of the enemy. And if all these things are failed, then you should go for Hinsa. But this Hinsa is like one man is killing other man, or like one man is attacking other man, like man in a sense, human beings, like they are doing Hinsa to each other. But when it comes to Hinsa, and when we talk about animals, like animal into consideration, then there is also a term like there is a term like Rakta Vilasini, and this term Rakta Vilasini is quite interesting. And goddesses are considered Rakta Vilasini, like the meaning of Rakta Vilasini, like goddesses they love blood. Actually, they love blood. And that's why, like, when we sacrifice buffaloes, when we sacrifice goats, birds, and all other animals, because we want to appease goddesses, because they are Rakta Vilasani by nature. And one argument, like why this lot of Hinsa do we have in our two popular epics that are like Ramayana, and other one is like Mahabharata. Then the argument is again the same, like because Rakta Vilasani, also known as Bhudevi. So Bhudevi actually desired to drink human blood, and because of that purpose, like this entire thing happened. So this is like one explanation we have. Otherwise, when we talk about the planet Earth, and when we talk about the elements that are there, 5 elements, we have this concept of Bhudevi, like Earth is considered as Bhudevi, and like Bhumata sometimes we say. And in Atharva Ved we have this this concept, like this earth is honey for all beings. Sorry, this is in Brihan Upanishad we have. And in Atharva Ved we have this concept, like this earth is the mother and I am her son. So this type of like relationship with like a biological relationship that we try to symbolically biological relationship that we try to establish with earth and with ourselves, that is very much there in our Upanishads and in our Vedas, that is there. Also,
Yeah, I would say it's not symbolic. I would say it's not symbolic. It's actually real.
Yeah, I'm talking about like, because I'm talking about in the linguistic view, like because it is written in language. So in that sense, I'm talking about. And the other thing is like we have also this concept, like the water, the presence of water is refreshing, like it is in Vedas, like in Apo Suktam we have this, the presence of water is refreshing and it imparting us with vigor and strength. So like, and for fire, we have like fire is like high priest, like because of the like fire is necessary for performing yajnas, so like it is considered like high priest. And so these concepts are already there in our thing. But there are certain things, like certain references that because of the paucity of time you might have not mentioned. For example, like but you gave some reference, but there is like one specific reference from Ayodhya Kand in Valmiki Ramayana, and where Ram not only persuades Sita, but persuades Sita and offers her meat, and persuades her in a manner like, okay, because it is well cooked, so you should also consume the meat. And other reference of Ram that is there in our Uttarakhand, where the reference is like Ram feeds Sita with wine, meat, and fruit. So all these references are also there. But sometimes like the possession of animals, they also caused lots of violence. Because we have this term like gavishati, like desire for cattle that we have. We have a term like
I can actually explain that. The reason why Rama and Sita can consume meat and so on is because they're kshatriyas. I think that's a fairly good explanation. Although they're living sort of like ascetics, they're also kshatriyas. It's not like they're out of their caste or anything like that. So I think that I wouldn't view that as proper.
We are running short of time.
Yeah, so so this is like, okay, I just sum up, like I'm not saying like consuming
can I just
consuming meat is good or bad. I'm not saying like that. So it's
no,
like
hold on, let me just respond to that one other important thing that you said about cattle, the desire for cattle, etc. That's very interesting because there is a myth about that as well, that cattle consumption was not okay at one point, but then it became okay at another point. Cattle consumption, I think, is a kind of code for the performance of a sacrifice, because the cow, the Vedic sacrifice, the yajna, because the cow was considered one of the best items to give to the gods, because it was really, because you give the best items to the gods. Cattle eating actually, I think, was a code for the performance of a sacrifice, and then once you give it, the remainder of which is consumed by the community. So that's again my understanding, that it was not really violence all in all, violence all the way, but that it was a code for the performance of a Vedic sacrifice.
Yeah, so what Vyas at one place said, like, this animal sacrifice is not
Sir,
sinful,
we are
actually.
running short of time.
Yeah, if it is sanctioned by Vedas. So I saw the last reference I will give in this half minute, and there is one last reference, and again it is from Rig Veda. And in this reference, what happens, like, motivated by Indrani, Indra says these words. And what are these words? Like, the words are like, the worshippers cook for me 15 to 20 bulls or oxen. I consume them and become healthy. Then the worshipper will fill both sides of my bellies. So their references are there. I'm not saying like killing animal is good or killing animal is bad, but obviously, like, we should avoid avoid hinsa like as much as possible, and we should not like go to killing like because simply consuming or simply for our enjoyment. If it is for higher purpose, like it's for yagya purpose, like it is for like sacrifice, as we have the concept of Dr. Vilasani, for that purpose, that is fine. But it is not like for simply filling our bellies and like simply like consuming them for the taste of our tongue. So I stop here.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Sushumna ma'am and Amitabh sir, for your brilliant presentations on less explored and less studied topics of Vedic and classical Indian literature. I thank you. I express my sincere thanks to both of you, and I express my sincere thanks to the organizers for giving me this opportunity. And Sangeeta ma'am, may I hand over this session to...
Yes, you can.
Okay, so I'll hand over this session to Dr. Mahajan. Mahajan sir? Mahajan sir?
Yes, ma'am.
Sir.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Good afternoon and warm welcome to the delegates, resource persons and participants into the third plenary session of the webinar on post-pandemic rejuvenation of higher education. This is organized by CELL and BG Golab College Sangvi under the aegis of Pune District Education Association, one of the prestigious institutions in and around Pune. It's my privilege to reverently appeal to Dr. Chandrasekhar Rajhans, Head Department of English, Government and PG College Narsinghpur, to preside over this core session of the webinar. Dr. Rajhans has 29 years of UG and 17 years of PG teaching experience, has participated in more than 50 national international conferences, has published over 20 research papers. He is a master trainer and coach in communication skills and personality development, recognized for his innovative outputs. In this plenary session, two internationally reputed resource persons directly from the medical science domain are going to enlighten us over some of the gray shades in the strategies of prevention of the pandemic and provide us with some guidelines. Both the resource persons have agreed to conclude their address within 15 minutes each. Then finally, the Honorable Chairperson will pronounce his observations. Now, I would like to introduce our first resource person, Professor Hari Sharma from the Netherlands. He works with the Cardiovascular Research Department of Pathology at the University Medical Center at Amsterdam. He is also the founder president of the Indian Academy of Biomedical Sciences. He is a PhD as well as DSc, FIABC, FIABS, and FIEIC. I request Dr. Sharma to address the audience on the ongoing COVID-19 prevention and pathogenesis. Over to Dr. Sharma.
Hello, namaste. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. So I need to go to my slides and greetings from Netherlands. It's pretty cold here in a sudden change of the weather. It's raining out here and it's around 10 degrees. So you can imagine how we are talking about. So let me try to come to my screen and share the slides. Are you able to see my slides?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Okay. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this conference, which is happening globally. And I'm sitting right in at our home in Rotterdam and speaking from one of my study room. And as I convey greetings and many thanks to all of you. And I hope you all are doing fine and managing your lives in a tough pandemic. This very tough situation of COVID-19. I'll take you through to the pathogenesis and prevention, means how this disease occurs and what are the causes and what are the symptoms and what are the possibilities by which we can prevent or at least take care of ourselves by preventing that we do not get the virus. COVID-19 is actually a disease which is caused by a virus, which is called the SARS-CoV-2. Means that is the second generation virus of coronavirus family. And before the outbreak originated, it actually from China in December 2019, when they announced to the world that so-and-so virus is spreading. There was no information about this virus obviously available to anyone else. Then this, the name SARS-CoV-2 also became a bit of controversy, but in January it was decided to name it as a SARS-CoV-2. We know a bit of historical perspectives. The oldest common ancestors of the coronavirus, we have heard some of the work in the poetry presentation of Mrs. Deshmukh from US. She was talking about various pandemic and linking pandemic with the poetry was a really amazing, fantastic presentation, which I enjoyed thoroughly. As you can see here in the historical perspectives that we talk about, there are many pandemics which have happened in the past. and these are based on viruses. So it's dated back. The corona name came obviously in 1990, but there were many other pandemics which have happened called the beta coronaviruses, which were several thousand years ago, or delta coronaviruses, gamma and alpha. So these are various names which are known. So this is a whole family of viruses which have troubled humans and animals and all sort of living creatures. But we had no clue. We didn't know anything about this coronavirus, which we are dealing right now. So what are the symptoms? As most of you know, and you have read a lot, and there are a lot of literature, and I think the guidelines through the WHO and also the individual governments of every country providing. I'm taking you through once again to refresh your memory, and also to obviously update you that in symptoms, quick reference points are like high fever, tiredness, and dry cough. The point for the high fever is above than 37.3 Celsius or 99 degree Fahrenheit and above temperature. One can suspect that this could be the virus. Then comes the tiredness. Obviously, the body feels completely tired because the virus has really changed the entire physiology, and the body is trying to cope at a immunology level as well as at the physiology level. So it's a lot of changes are happening that require the body becomes kind of very energy less, and there is the irritation in the airways, and it's a kind of dry cough. So you do not produce mucus without expelling any mucus. It's a dry cough. So you have cough most of the time, but there is no mucus coming out. So it's a very typical characteristics in case of this virus. Now I'll introduce you how this disease occurs. So this virus SARS-CoV-2 lead to the disease CoV-2. This COVID-19, which we call because it's called the coronavirus induced disease. The identification was 19, so like it's from December 19. December 19, it's the name given to this disease. Now, the coronaviruses are a large family of viruses that are known to cause illnesses ranging from the common cold to the more severe disease. We knew about a number of viruses earlier, so like the Middle East respiratory syndrome virus called MERS that came in 80s, the severe acute respiratory syndrome, the SARS virus, which includes H1N1, which was again in 2003 another outbreak in all over the world, and then killed also several hundred thousand people around the globe. Now this coronavirus 19 is identified obviously in Wuhan in China, that province, and this is absolutely a new virus, and we are all trying to learn as much as possible. So whatever the knowledge available so far, I would try to share with you. And obviously, these are the coronavirus, the structure is given here in such a way that these all viruses have modified themselves into more resistance and more stable particles. So starting from the camel and bat, and this is in 2003 was the bat. That's how it was called the severe acute respiratory syndrome, because the people were having the breathing problems, and so therefore this is again called the SARS-CoV-2, means that is the second generation of virus which had outbreak in 2003. This looks like this. When you look at the molecular level, the virus is looking like and this is structure. So a typical corona structure, it has got this genomic RNA. This RNA is the key actually, and because as we know that RNA is a highly unstable molecule. If it is not properly secured, it can immediately, it can degrade itself. Therefore, this this particle has created in such a way that it created a beautiful envelope and very resistant envelope to save this single-stranded RNA, and it is made up of a number of proteins: the spike, membrane, nucleocapsid, envelope, and genomic. Obviously, the RNA to save this. So that's how it looks like, the virus, and how it works, how it affects. If I show you in a kind of representative manner, that the virus, when it attacks, it can go through the nose, or when we are breathing, or through eyes. And obviously the respiratory system is a major attacking point, and creating all those symptoms which I showed and mentioned earlier in my earlier slides, like tiredness, dry cough, high fever, and also the difficulty in breathing, which is really a last part when patients need to be hospitalized. Now, to refresh your memory, coming back to the respiratory system, what we are talking about, how our respiration looks like, as you see that this is a tracheal passage, which is directly linked to our nasal passage. And as you can see here, this trachea and this main bronchus, it's divided into two to create the two lobes of the lungs. And this area is called the conducting zone. So as long as the problem is remaining at this level, patient is still in a kind of treatable or manageable situation. But when the problem goes deeper down to the respiratory zone, where it starts destroying the alveolar part of the lungs, then the patient is very, very difficult to survive, because there is no exchange of gases. Hence, the impure blood is circulated throughout the body, and the patient would not survive. So the brain wouldn't work, the other organs would also fail. So multiple organ failure would lead to the patient to not survive. And there are a lot of comorbidities, asthma, COPD, which are very major problems around the globe, but also in India, and they enhance this problem, because these patients, they already have this bronchial tree, which is already narrowed and already disturbed. But when the virus attacks, then these patients are the very first to get into the severe problems. In the transverse section point of, if we look at this epithelial lining where the virus attaches, this is the airway wall, airway lumen, and the mucus glands. And I'll take you to the work, some of our work in the past, and also the current ongoing work. As you can see here in a kind of transverse cut section, you see a beautiful epithelial lining in the normal human being that has got here under the epithelial layer, these glands, and also the blood vessels. And glands are in both the areas, there's some mucosal and mucosal. And these colored, which have been stained by alpha smooth muscle actin, these are the cells called the smooth muscle. Very important part of the bronchial ring, which support the lungs to function, to support the lungs to have contraction and relaxation. So when the virus attaches to the epithelial layer, it creates further problems. I will take you through the mechanisms. Now, the spreading of the virus, obviously through people from person to person, that's how it is spread, and can spread from also by surfaces. So like when the person is sneezing or coughing, then those fine droplets coming out of the mouth or through the nose from the patient or the infected person, they can fall on these droplets, land on the surfaces, and these surfaces virus can survive for some hours, days, and even weeks actually. and this surfaces they called the fomites. So when they made fomites, that virus which we can get it by touching again and then bringing the virus to our nasal passages. That's how the infection can happen. So person to person as well as fomite, and we try to avoid both the things in the current scenario. Asymptomatic people, which is also very important to know that when many people, those who have a very strong immune system, the virus is not creating those kind of havocs which many other people are getting it. So these remain as asymptomatic. The virus is troubling them. So the virus is infecting their respiratory system, but they have their body has already created a defense mechanism by which they do not get really symptoms of high fever or dry cough, and then they come out of this disease routinely. So, which is a large number, large population in the world in that category. So let me take you through more deeper into the mechanism, how this virus affects, as you can see here, these various proteins on the virus makes it more stable. And are you able to hear me? Are you all able to
Yes,
hear
sir.
me?
Yes, sir. Yes, yes. Yes, sir, we can hear you.
Yeah.
Yes, everybody can hear you, sir.
Okay. So these structural proteins which makes this labile RNA. Normally, if this RNA was there as such, it will not survive. So obviously, no effect, no problem would be there in the human being if the virus was not having this capsule like this very strong layer around it. And this is made up of these structural proteins: the nucleocapsid, the spike protein, envelope protein, and membrane. So we need to around the globe, the people are working to target all these proteins somehow by which they can attack the virus. And the functional proteins, which are obviously the RNA here, which is the genomic makeup, the critical for binding of the host cell receptors to facilitate entry. So the spike protein, the function is they attaches to a specific receptor in our airways on the epithelial cells, which I showed you. And then the virus is getting into the cell and the epithelial cells and then damaging itself. And it interacts with the envelope protein with the M from viral envelope. And obviously the other functions are listed for the M protein. The central organization of COV assembly determines the shape of this, the envelope, and then makes this virus more stable. How it happens, as you can see here, various steps. When the virus attaches to the ACE2, it's called the angiotensin converting enzyme receptor, which was already known in the literature. And we have already done a lot of work on this ACE in relation to the heart failure, in relation to the hypertension. In fact, its role is in hypertension. And so this virus attaches to the ACE2 receptor, and it just starts doing the typical signaling mechanism. The cell thinks that there is a ligand coming to its so the cell in the human body thinks that it's a very natural process by which the cell is getting a ligand, but that's not the true. It is really a culprit. It's called the deadly invader. It's a one of the beautiful article from Nature, one of the top journals. And this spike protein is the key. So if we can somehow find the possibility to compete, then that could be a very nice thing. So now in the events, how it is exactly happening at the cell level, as you can see, when the virus attaches to the epithelial layer, which I showed you in the lungs and the beautiful transfer section, this attaches to those layers, and it gets into the cell. When the virus get into the cell, then it starts releasing the RNA, and that RNA mixes with our human gene. So the cell recognizes as a natural process, and epithelial cells start making more and more of the same proteins which this virus has got it, as well as more of its own RNA. So a single RNA particle attaches to the cell and start making more and more of its particle in the human epithelial cells. And then eventually this epithelial cell will die, because when a lot of these particles are created by the cell itself, cell realizes, oh, I have done something entirely wrong. So then it is immediately start releasing its weapon, which is called the lysosome, the enzymes from the lysosomes. And these enzymes try to rush to kill all these proteins which the cell itself has created, but it doesn't work. Its cell becomes into a kind of suicidal mode and cell dies. Viruses are released and they go further to attack on the other cells. That's how the epithelial layer is denuded. Epithelial layer is destroyed. The respiratory system is getting weakened continuously, and then it attaches to the other cells down in the alveolar region, and then the respiration is really hampered, and the patient becomes absolutely very, very severe. So it's a really very disastrous situation how it creates by this creating a whole network of whole battery of cytokines for which we are trying to target. So there are many labs around the globe trying to find a treatment because treatment is much earlier than the vaccine. Vaccine is also underway. So as you can see here, these all the typical system in the cell releases these many cytokines. It's called the cytokine storm, and then killing all these epithelial cells, denuding it, and then getting the entire immune system is weakened and the body cannot defend itself, and obviously the patient won't survive. So at early stages of this, we need to find solutions, as well as obviously the vaccine is one of the most promising avenue for this virus.
Sir, we are running short of time.
Yeah. So in the immune system, obviously there are many complicated mechanisms happening in our body. I won't go through detail here, but you can imagine that there is a lot of problems linked with this immune system. So the spreading, I have already mentioned that man to man and fomite. I would talk about the risk factors in the in relation to the COVID-19. The elderly people, those who are, let's say, above 50 and having cardiovascular or respiratory illnesses, they are the most vulnerable people, and so we have to save them and protect them. And the healthcare workers caring for the patient, they are also because they have a very high load of virus exposures. So we need to be very, very careful. That's why the PPE and all very strong protection equipments are given to them. So obviously we know that the 80% people, because of their immune system, they come out of the problem. We are talking about the statistic. When it look at the data just a few hours ago, more than 6 million people are affected. Deaths are about almost 400,000 people died all over the world. And as you can see, the virus effect is slowly going down. If you look at the daily deaths around the globe. However, there are many countries where things are on rise. Like for example, in India, the number of deaths and the number of cases are on rise. This is the data from the entire world. As you can see here, in US, about 2 million people infected, or more than 110,000 people died there, and followed by many other countries. And India is also among them with about more than 200,000 people affected. So the daily deaths, this is the curve of India in relation to the death. It is still on rise. So it is really important that India try to, because the peak is still not there. In other countries, the peak has arrived, and the infection and also the death rate is going down. For example, Netherlands, for the last 2-3 weeks, we are having a kind of static curve and even going down. So our death rate is gone much lower in the last 3 weeks. Prevention measures, the antibiotics, they do not work. We already know that the protecting ourselves, washing the hands, and I think a lot of information is circulated, and I think we will hear much more guidelines from our next speaker, Professor Abbas. So I can skip here. And the protection,
please, sir.
And protecting measures, obviously for the elderly people to stay back at home and not to expose themselves for the virus, and obviously while buying the food and all that, taking all those precautions. Mask also, I think, is a very important aspect, and I'll leave it to Professor Abbas to perhaps he will touch a little bit more. And I think I would stop here for the sake of time. Thank you very much, Dr. Sangeeta, and entire team in Pune who coordinated this conference globally. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
sir.
Dr. Sharma.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sharma, for your highly resourceful rendering. I would now like to request the next resource person, Professor Dr. Abbas Ali Mehdi, Professor and Head, Department of Biochemistry, King George's Medical University, Lucknow, ex-Vice Chancellor, ERA University, Lucknow, President of the Society for Free Radical Research in India, Secretary General of Indian Academy for Biomedical Sciences, and also coordinator of the DST FIST project, to enlighten the audience on ICMR guidelines and education in COVID-19 pandemic. Over to Dr. Mehdi.
Very good afternoon from Lucknow. As Professor Hari Sharma was saying that Netherlands is having a wonderful weather this day. In Lucknow here also we are having rains for last 2 days. And it is an air-conditioned weather around 22 to 24 we are having in the month of June. So greetings from Lucknow, and thank you to the organizers for inviting us and sharing our views. My topic which I have been given is basically with regard to the ICMR guidelines and the work which ICMR has of late done. Because ICMR, as we know, is the apex body in India for the formulation and coordination of biomedical research, and it is one of the oldest medical research bodies in the world. It was founded in 1911, and since then, its main research agenda has been aligned with the national health priorities, and they have basically made effort to reduce the total burden of disease and to promote health and well-being in the Indian population. So that has been the main task which has been given to the Indian Council of Medical Research. And it has been working in this area to promote biomedical research in the country. And they promote it through intramural as well as the extramural research fundings. So that was the prime thrust which was given to ICMR, and it was known for that. But of late, when the WHO declared the outbreak of this coronavirus from China as Professor Hari Sharma has mentioned, that the outbreak was basically from the Wuhan seafood wholesale market, where there was the involvement of the sale of seafood and live animals. And from there, this virus was first started to appear in the world. And thereafter, the ICMR formed a team, a dedicated core team to work in this area. And there was a rapid response team for COVID-19, which was formed under the leadership of the Director General of Indian Council of Medical Research, Professor Balram Bhargava. And they coordinated in a very beautiful manner to start immediately the lab network, sample testing, evaluation of the diagnostic kits, procurement and distribution of the kits to various centers in India. There were many committees were formed and a task force were formed to coordinate the work, including the data collection, analysis, media management, and the financial and administrative matters. So not many committees, not many resources were there. It was coordinated response and very prompt response, which was quite unexpected in India at that time, because they immediately started to act and work together as a team. That was a major thing, because initially we were having only one center, that was the National Institute of Virology at Pune, which was coordinating this work. But and this Indian Council of Medical Research, National Institute of Virology, basically functions as the resource center for viral diseases network, which was formed many years back. And basically, initially, all the laboratories were supplied with the primers, probes, reagents, controls, and SOPs for real-time PCR testing, which is the gold standard for the testing of the COVID. And it started from the NIV Pune initially, and that was the nerve center. And they quickly acted, and they have got these various centers which were already established by the Indian Council of Medical Research, Virology Research Centers. Initially, there were about 106 centers which were established in different parts of the country in last 10 years. And over the years, this network was expanded, and currently, immediately after the outbreak of the coronavirus, this number of centers were extended to 157. And these are known as virus research and diagnostic laboratories, which are spread all over the India. Since 2013, they have been working, and they are involved in the viral diseases, and they immediately started acting in a coordinated manner. Now, this is how labs are established in different parts of the country, and there's a networking, beautiful networking coordinated by a team, which is for lab networking and sample testing. And they are coordinating both with the government setup as well as in the private labs. So there is a close coordination so as to have much testing done both in the government and the private sector. And you see that in last couple of months, just in last less than 2 months, starting from one lab at NIV, that is National Institute of Virology, Pune, and few labs of ICMR which were there for virology. Today we have expanded, and just on 3rd of June, there were 710 labs which were testing corona in India. So much rapid, and every day we are adding 10 to 15 new labs in this number. And in the government setup, around 500 labs are there, and in the private setup, there are about 200 plus labs which are testing corona all over India, pan-India. So this is how rapid expansion of testing facilities, and as Professor Hari Sharma was talking about, the increase in the numbers of positive cases, that is primarily because of increase in the setup of testing in India in last couple of weeks. And we are going on increasing the numbers almost daily. So up till now, this was the case of, I think, yesterday at 9 a.m., we tested about 718, around 42 lakhs, meaning more than 4 million tests for coronavirus have been conducted. And this number has increased tremendously now. Daily over around, we are going to touch by 15th of this month, 1.5 lakhs samples will be tested pan-India. And this is how rapid expansion in Uttar Pradesh. I have been given the task to coordinate the testing labs and the facilities over here by Indian Council of Medical Research. And we started from few hundreds initially. And today we have touched just this morning around 12,000 plus processing and testing of the samples were done. And we are going to touch 15,000 by 15th of this month. And by end of June, we are planning to have about 20,000 tests per day. We started from one lab at King George's Medical University, Lucknow. And today we are having about 37 labs in the state of Uttar Pradesh where we are testing the virus. Now, continuously ICMR is working, and ICMR has really made a name for itself by rapid response teams, like for example, in the validation of the kits. So not many kits which are coming into the market, they are being validated because initially we were just going in for the FDA approved or European Union approved kits. But now the ICMR has established a number of centers, and they have sent the nodal centers in different parts of India, including one at King George's Medical University, Lucknow. That's the institution where I'm working, where we have got the facilities for the validation of the kits. Whatever the kits are being made available, they are being validated at our center, as also in other centers pan-India. Now, this validation of the kits is being done around 14 centers at the moment in India. And there is fast track approval of the kits by the ICMR. And the supply of the kits and reagents to all government labs is regulated by the Indian Council of Medical Research through their 14 depots in different parts of the country, including a one at KGMC Lucknow, one is in PGI Chandigarh, rest 12 are in ICMR centers in Ahmedabad, Hyderabad, Mumbai, Trivandrum, Chennai, and different parts of the country. So they are basically coordinating the supply of the reagents and the kits to different government labs. And this is how the procurement is done at the central level. They procure the kits, and then there is a distribution team headed by Dr. Tuteja from Jodhpur. They distribute the kits through a team in north, south, east, west zones. And beautifully they are managing this whole show through the coordinating teams located at different parts of the country. Similarly, distribution is being carried out in different parts of the country through this 14 centers, including one at KGMU Lucknow, which I'm looking after here. Similarly, there is high-level technical committee of public health experts, which is chaired by the member of Niti Aayog, Dr. Vinod Paul, and it is co-chaired by the Secretary Health as well as Secretary Research of Government of India, and they are coordinating all the. This is the National Task Force, which is coordinating the public health issues. These are the experts there. Similarly, there is a research groups of the National Task Force. Not many people are involved. People are involved there to monitor research which is being conducted in COVID-19 in different parts of the country. Similarly, multi-centric therapeutic research studies are being also monitored, both for the plasma therapy, ECG, hydroxychloroquine, and various trials which are conducted through WHO. They are being coordinated again by the Indian Council of Medical Research. Similarly, there is a policy group for Ayurveda, Unani, Homeopathy, Siddha, another system, Indian system of medicines, and that is also coordinated. This is Ayush group is coordinated centrally at the Indian Council of Medical Research. Similarly, data collection analysis is also being continuously done and monitored. Media management is being done, financial and administrative management is done at the central level. Then this NIV COVID-19 response team continuously monitors the kits which are being supplied to the various centers in India. These are the teams. Moreover, ICMR is making guidelines. Like they have prepared the national guidelines for the ethic committee, because that is very vital and important. So many people are coming to submit the projects for the research, and rigorous monitoring of the proposals is needed, because number of patients are limited and so many clinical trials people are proposing. So that is very important, and ICMR has made guidelines for that. Similarly, they have made guidelines for the management of pregnant women. That is another very vital point. And that aspect has been taken care by Indian Council of Medical Research. Similarly, they have got an advisory for the use of hydroxychloroquine. Not much controversy is there world over now regarding this. So many studies were published and they have been retracted of late from the prestigious journals. But ICMR is continuously monitoring the use of the drug in India, and they are patronizing this in a very beautiful manner. Similarly, they have also made standard guidelines for medical legal autopsy, another very important point for COVID-19 of the deaths of the individuals, which is happening. So guidelines have been prepared by Indian Council of Medical Research for that also. So many guidelines have been prepared to educate the doctors, paramedics, nurses, how to handle all these things. And that is because of the formation of the rapid response team by the Indian Council of Medical Research. And not only that, they have also prepared guidelines for prevention of COVID-19 and how to contain it quickly. So I think with this, I have covered basically what the preparedness is there at the level of the Government of India to work and help and facilitate in containment of COVID-19. And I think, as Professor Hari Sharma has very rightly pointed out, that the only thing is the prevention is the basic tool to contain the disease. So thank you very much. I think I've taken not much time. I finished it within 10-12 minutes. So thank you very much.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Dr. Mehdi, for a highly enlightening discourse on education in pandemic. Now, lastly, I would urge the chairperson, Dr. Rajhans, to share his views and remarks on this session.
Thank you, Mahajan sir. I do not know exactly how to comment upon the insights made by these two medical stalwarts, because I'm a student of literature. What they have shared with us, that is the hope of light, that is a voice of encouragement. We all as citizens, we all as students and teachers, we are right now living in a mood of depression. Our colleges are no longer functioning. The conference was aimed at knowing the post-pandemic rejuvenation of higher education, how to rejuvenate the higher education. That is the biggest worry right now. We are in the month of June, and we are still not sure about the final examinations, how to conduct it. And that is the main worry of all the educationists and the educators and the managements and the governments. Recently, some of the governments, they have come up with the plan that they are going to declare all the students pass without conducting the final examinations. Is that a degree with a qualification or without a qualification? That is the main concern right now. Every day we keep on watching the numbers of inflicted, the COVID-19 virus inflictions, deaths. And behind all these watchings, there is a very humble and meek kind of expectation that is there a news of a probable vaccine or a curable medicine? Is there a news? Well, I'm really very sure that soon the virologists and the scientists and such talented medical professionals are going to bring medicines and the vaccines for this COVID-19 virus. How about those 30 lakh plus teachers who became jobless in the recent months? Immediately after the declaration of this pandemic, in India alone, there are nearly 30 lakh teachers who became out of job. I'm talking about only teachers. I'm not talking about the migrant laborers and other things and the closing business houses. My concern is only the problems the universities and the colleges are facing right now. The point is how long and when the colleges will start. We had right in the inaugural session, Honorable Advocate Sandeep Kadam sir, he he delivered the keynote address right in the beginning, and his concern was also finding out the ways and methods to develop the alternatives to conduct the colleges. How the colleges will come in how long will it take? Well, recently, University Grants Commission has taken 2 steps. The step 1 is that they have curtailed the number of working days in a semester. Now, earlier it was nearly 180 days. Now they have brought it to 120 days. Apart from that, they have identified 100 good universities in India which are going to offer online courses. So what will be the future of the offline campuses? The campuses which are no longer in a position to work as online learning centers. So the managements have to make choices where to invest better, where to invest more, in the buildings, in the salary, or in the purchase and procurement of the softwares, LMS, and other things. So this is a big question. So this is the big depression we are right now facing. And there was again a worry about the students coming from the rural and tribal backgrounds, those who are suffering from the lack of devices and the spectrum of networks. So I personally believe that India has been a very strong country. This is my conviction. I have my trust in this very feeling that the government is going to come out with ways. There may be scholarship schemes or something like that. Each one teach one. There is a beautiful slogan. Now we may have another slogan that a device for everyone. So the colleges may attract the admissions in the coming academic session with the promise to provide devices for each student who comes for the admission. So there is one possibility. Second, in some countries, we come to know about the rental services where the devices are provided on rents. So maybe in India also we have a rental service for the devices. There may be possibilities of providing the second-hand devices or the refurbished devices to the students. There may be companies who are going to come up with Android applications and the softwares which will help you to develop these things. 2 things I may feel like adding. The first thing is that there will be a big doubt in the mind of the managements, how much to invest. What will happen if the old days come back? Will the old days come back? That is the point. So if the old days come back, the days are going not to be exactly as it had been. So we will be having a blended kind of classroom in the days to come. There will be students, there will be colleges, there will be teachers who will be quite proficient in handling both the kinds of classes, the mouth-to-mouth class, the traditional classroom, and the digital platforms. Well, there is one more thing that in the coming days, the managements and the teachers and the students and the parents, they all have to be properly trained. A massive, a vigorous, a very, powerful training plan has to be carried out by the planners of education in order to bring the desirable changes. This is really very important. This is really very important that there will be 2 emerging classes. One, technology proficient colleges, technology deficient colleges, technology proficient teachers, technology deficient students and teachers as well. Now, who is going to survive? That is a big question. The government has to make an all-inclusive, sustainable kind of plan. That is the biggest worry. And lastly, I'm really afraid that there is going to be surely a drop down in the general admissions this year because there is growing unemployment. There is the crisis in the rural areas for the employment. The income is less. So the drop down in general admissions is really lurking ahead of us. We have to be worried about that. And a lot of things are to be planned. Online courses will come apart from the distance learning mode and the traditional learning mode. We will be having a third mode, that is what we call the online learning mode. So we will be having 3 types of colleges in the days to come. You have to make a choice. As a leader, you cannot remain passive. As intellectuals, we cannot remain passive. We need to take the steps. If we remain inert, we don't take, and we wait for others to do and prove, then we are ready to copy. That is going to be a suicidal point for many of the colleges, I tell you. And finally, the lockdown has put a lockdown on our social movement, but it has never put a lockdown on our way of thinking. Let us come together and discuss and share our feelings and learn the new ways to cope up with this pandemic. And this is setback. Let us make it a comeback. Thank you very much, sir.
I would like to propose the vote of thanks. My heartfelt thanks to Dr. Abbas Ali Mehdi as well as Dr. Hari S. Sharma for their rendering that was academic, that was humanitarian, that was futuristic. And I would, in the end, also like to thank, and especially thank more, the chairperson of this session, Dr. Raj Hans, for providing all the three perspectives, academic, humanitarian, and futuristic, to this session. These three dimensions will remain in our minds as we go back to our classrooms, hopefully in near future. Thank you so much, sir, for making this session such a success. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
And I would like to heartily welcome the treasurer of Pune District Education Association, Advocate Deshmukh Sahib, into this international webinar. Thanks.
Sir, hand over it to Ayodhya.
Yeah. Now I hand over the charge of the next session to Ayodhya Madam.
Yes,
Ayodhya Madam, please take over.
yes, sir. Good afternoon, everyone. I welcome all the participants, all the honorable principals of various colleges, and I welcome Honorable Principal Dr. Nitin Ghorpade sir and the coordinator of this program, Sangeeta Ghodke ma'am, and the honorable chief guest today, Dr. Anjali Kurne ma'am, and the treasurer of PDF college, Dr. Deshmukh sir. Now, I would like to introduce the chief guest of valedictory function, Dr. Anjali Kurne ma'am. She is holding doctorate degree in anthropology and holding expertise in sociocultural anthropology and urban anthropology and development anthropology. She has published 6 books, and some students have taken guidance under her for the research also. 5 students have completed their PhD under her guidance, and 2 international students have completed their PhD under her guidance. She has been working with 9 international bodies, including various countries, Oxford Brooks, and other countries are there. And there is no need to say that she has participated in various national and international committees and conferences. And presently, she has been working as a dean in humanities and social sciences of Savitribai Phule University, Pune. Without taking much time, I would like to invite her. Please, ma'am, Dr. Kurne, ma'am, it's over to you. Kurne, ma'am, do you hear me? Yes.
कुर्णे मॅडम, कुर्णे मॅडम ना अनम्यूट व्हायला पाहिजे.
हा, मी केलंय. Am I audible?
हा सर, या you
Yes,
can
yes.
start now, madam. You can start.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. All present dignitaries on this digital platform. Chairperson, Shriyut Rajendraji Ghadge, Vice President, PDEA Pune. Dr. Deshmukh, just now I came to know his name. Principal Dr. Nitin Ghorpade, who is also convener of this webinar. Coordinator of this national webinar, Dr. Sangeeta Ghodke, all the participants, professors, colleagues, dear students, friends. Firstly, I congratulate Principal Dr. Nitin Ghorpade and Dr. Sangeeta Ghadge for initiating and successfully organizing this current and exceptionally significant webinar activity in the college. As a Dean of Faculty of Humanities, I consider it is indeed pleasure to address this gathering of scholars at this important and very interesting contemporary issues of post-pandemic rejuvenation of the higher education. As you have premeditated that there is a paradigm shift taking place in the nature of educational system. This event reflects the educational reform in India. In the COVID-19 pandemic era, we are conducting online conferences. We all aware that in the occurrence of COVID-19, educational institutions were closed suddenly in mid-March. So it interrupted the higher educational sector and drastically changed the educational system. All over the world, the teachers were first instructed to continue teaching through online apps such as Google Classrooms, Zooms. So they continued with the virtual teaching. The pandemic has changed the centuries-old chalk-talk teaching model to one motivated by the technology. Educational institutions are implementing online teaching learning and try to inculcate a virtual study culture among the students. So this was the first instructions given by the universities that continue the teaching online. Another instruction was given that changed the essential part of their courses, that 20 to 40% of the syllabus should cover online portion. Massive open online courses, that is MOOC and Swayam courses are offered. Savitribai Phule Pune University too instructed the same. I was also the part of this giving instruction as a dean. So it is perhaps first for India to trial paradigm shift to the e-learning world in the higher education system. Merging the classroom teaching in the e-learning. If you see the rationale behind it, that rationale behind switch to online education was that guarantee the students will not depart from their studies. So they will continue with the learning. We all know that it was a big challenges for the colleges and the universities to complete their syllabus on time without cancellation on the education excellence. This was the big challenge. And other challenge that we are still facing, that is exam, university exams and college exams, those being postponed and finally cancelled by the government. But yet, we don't know whether the exam will be there or not. So here I just want to convey that academicians are approaching for the online mode of education for the classroom teaching, and online teaching has become inevitability. We don't have other options in the current situation. Of course, it is not only the colleges and universities in India, but universal to look for the novel solutions in the small phase of time. We should aware that the online mode of education is relatively new in India. It's very, very new in India. In 2012, the first Asian massive open online course, that is MOOC, was developed by the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. We were having a classroom lecture-based approach to teaching, or face-to-face or physical teaching. Actually, if you see, even in India, audio-visual aids in the classroom was introduced long ago, in addition to classroom teaching. But very few universities are offering online classes to the students in advance. However, if you see the today's situation, many higher educational institutes and universities were not prepared with such amenities and services. The unexpected change in the method of teaching and learning has demonstrated that educational institutes are not well equipped. Lots of enhancements, right infrastructures are needed. We understand that there is a gap. There is a digital gap between the village level colleges and colleges at urban areas. And students might face impact very harshly. And therefore, I consider Indian colleges and universities may take time to grip the change in teaching learning method. Currently, we are in the transition phase, that is face-to-face learning to online mode education. All educational institutions should be, if we want to continue this, I would I'm giving some suggestions that all educational institutions should be more techno-savvy to improve the quantity and quality of the online mode of education. The teacher should be given training in the use of technology for the education and handle the difficulty very successfully. Higher educational institute should design the academic syllabus for online education. In addition, all the material should be available in the regional languages also. And we will have to change our mindset. First, that we'll have to do that, we'll have to change our mindset, our attitude for the online mode of teaching and learning. The student should inspire for the e-learning. Obviously, I feel that online teaching could never equivalent to face-to-face physical classroom teaching. Certainly, but at the same time, online mode education is reasonable and protective resolution in the outbreak of COVID-19. But whether it is possible in all over India is questionable. Online mode education is not arriving to all Indian students. It reaches to few Indian students. So the students staying particularly in the rural districts of India and those belong to lower section of the society do not have the opportunity to use internet, as they are not equipped with the infrastructure and technology. Thus, I feel yet we have to see whether this novel coronavirus has introduced the novel concept of online mode of education across the world, whether the conventional offline mode of teaching can flawlessly challenge to an online method of teaching and education, whether the coronavirus pandemic consequences in a new solution for higher education and brought the rejuvenation in higher education, whether the Indian higher education system equipped to carry out digital online education model and manage the change? So these are all, all questions, challenges in front of us. If you see today's webinar, I feel today's webinar is a life example of growing realization that we have to adapt to the changing situation and prepare ourselves well to meet emerging challenges in the higher education with the changing nature of delivering speech and teaching. I am confident that this webinar would have made a major contribution in enhancing understanding of emerging threats and challenges of digital inclusion in the higher education. So friends, I just want to convey that please understand we have to go for long with online mode of education with all its challenges. With these few words, I would like to thank Principal Dr. Ghorpade and Dr. Sangeeta Ghodke for inviting me to deliver this valedictory speech and giving me an opportunity to share my views. Thank you all and wish the best. I wish the best to convener and coordinator of this webinar, and I wish the best to all participants. Thanks.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for the enlightening session. Now, I would like to invite our Honorable Deshmukh sir, the Treasurer of Pune District, Pune Associate. Please, sir, Deshmukh sir. Yes. May I reach?
अनम्यूट करायला पाहिजे, त्यांनी अनम्यूट नाही केलेलं.
Deshmukh sir, please unmute your side.
Yourself.
Deshmukh sir, can you tell ma'am?
प्रशांत
सरांनी तिथूनच करायला पाहिजे. मी करतोय सरांना प्रयत्न करतोय मी देशमुख सरांना अनम्यूट करण्याचा, पण होत नाही.
Can you call him and tell?
देशमुख साहेबांनीच करायला पाहिजे.
Yes.
Hello.
Yes, sir. You are most welcome, sir. I invite you to express few words.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Achha. Good afternoon to one and all. I, Advocate Deshmukh, welcome you on behalf of Pune District Education Association for the valedictory function, which has been arranged for one day. The subject of the webinar, web seminar, is under the name Post-Pandemic Rejuvenation of Higher Education, a Global Perspective. As it is a joint venture between our PDS, Baburao Gholok College, Sangvi, and a cluster of 10 departments of English department of our PDA, which we call as SAIL. It is a positive step through which you will have many more academic programs in the future. I think, can you hear? I think, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
I think all our partners, cluster colleges in the valedictory function, and I thank you all the resource persons, session chairs, then the listeners, then chairpersons who have been participated in the seminar. With this, the head of the departments of the English, who are the teaching and non-teaching staff, with this also PG students and delegates, who are the delegates, have made the conference a great success. As a session chair, I would like to thank you. Just now we have been delivered the lecture, Professor Anjali Kurne, who is the Dean of Humanities, for insightful talk on the challenges of the higher education at present. As she has been working in the anthropology department, she is a proper resource person for the theme of this rejoin higher education. Madam, your speech just I have also heard just now. Madam, your speech was very informative and it clears the debts with theoretic vision to the higher education. I thank you. I thanks you and hope to have a long the association with the Pune District Association. As a whole, this web conference is a huge success and Sovina is another success in the conference. That so many our lecturers have been taken the efforts to prepare it. I congratulate all the paper writers who made the seminar very possible and success. The conference is recorded on YouTube also. We can revisit also the conference on YouTube. Congratulations from Pune District Education Association. I congratulate the convener of the web conference, my beloved principal, Dr. Nitin Ghorpade, who is a very innovative and the technology principal, and also the coordinator, Dr. Sangeeta Ghorke, to whom I know so many years, who have executed the conference successfully. The subject we have been chosen is very important. It is a global challenges of higher education. I appreciate the efforts of the team of Cluster Cell. I hope that we will have many more web seminars in future under the banner of this cluster. Thank you, one, thank you all. Thanks.
Thank you, sir. I come to the last but not the least part of the webinar. I would like to propose vote of thanks. Ghorke ma'am.
Yes.
Shall I go ahead?
Yeah, you can. Please.
It's a great privilege to express vote of thanks to all of the honorable principals, teachers, participants, guests who have witnessed it as a memorable and successful event today. My words are not enough to express the gratitude on behalf of PDA's Bajirao Golab College, Bapurauji Golab College, Sangvi, in collaboration with Cluster of English Language and Literature, Pune. I express my heartfelt gratitude to our chief guest, Honorable Dr. Anjali Kurne ma'am and Dr. Deshmukh sir for giving valuable time and guidance. I am thankful to the Honorable Principal of various colleges and Principal Dr. Nitin Ghorpade sir and the coordinator of this program, Sangeeta Ghorke ma'am, giving time and guidance for this webinar. I am thankful to the chief editor of Langlit International Peer-Reviewed Journal, Prashant Mote sir, for giving a chance to publish research papers in that journal. I am thankful to all the honorable participants once again, and I am also thankful to those who have directly or indirectly supported for making a huge success for this international conference. Once again, I am thankful to one and all. Thank you very much. Ghorke ma'am, it's to It's over to you.
Now you can declare that the seminar is over. Yeah, the conference is over. You can declare it now.
Yes. Also, with the permission of the coordinator and the principal, I declare that we hereby end the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank
All
you,
the
sir.
best.
Thank you, sir.
Stay healthy, stay safe,
you, sir.
stay healthy.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
All the
Thank you
best.
so much.
All the best.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thanks, sir.
Thank
Thank
you,
you
sir.
all.
Deshmukh sir, thank you so much. Thank you.
Sir, Mahajan, sir.
Thank you, sir, so much.
Thank you, sir.
Deshmukh sir, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
sir.
Gorke madam.
Kale madam, nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
I
Evangelist
request
sir.
participants
Thank you,
to
everyone. Thank you, madam.
leave the
Thank you,
webinar. No?
everyone.
Thank you.
Prashant, thank you for your support.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you,
Kindly
everybody.
leave the room, webinar room. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you.
साजरं करा.
Thank
Okay,
you,
sir.
Gauri.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. तुझं
केडींना
माझ्यावर फार
Thank you,
प्रेम.
sir.
Thank you,
केडी
Sonali
सोनवणे
sir.
सर शुभेच्छा पुन्हा एकदा लग्न
Thank you,
वाढदिवस.
thank you, thank you.
Mahajan sir, thank you.
Thank you so much,
Wonderful
ma'am.
session.
अयोध्या मॅडम,
Ah,
गौरी
sir,
मॅडम,
thank you.
माइंडकर मॅडम.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Ayodhya.
Yes,
छान
sir.
झालं
Nice
Thank you, ma'am.
presentation.
valedictory.
छान छान छान.
Nice valedictory.
Thank you, thank you. There were no comments.
Thank you.
छान
Thank
झालं,
you.
छान झालं. सगळ्यांनी
Nice.
छान
It
केलं.
was wonderful. It was nice and
I
wonderful.
request
Kendra sir.
panelists to leave the room, webinar room.
Yes, sir.
Please.
Yes, Mr. Shan, please.
Thank you.
From your side, end the meeting, Prashant.
Yes, end the meeting, Prashant. From your
Actually, I am facing electricity problem here. So kindly, I
Okay,
request.
I'm
That's why I'm
searching the button
requesting
to
you.
end that.
We are leaving. We are leaving on our
Yes,
own.
yes,
Yes,
sir.
please,
Thank
please.
you. Thank you.
Still, even though the electricity has gone, still I am managing it from mobile and everything. It's okay.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Prashant.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, sir.